Good morning, class.
Have you ever read that a game had good animation or felt satisfying and wondered what exactly that means?
Maybe you've read conflicting reviews, one saying that a game felt good to play, while the other said it feels, floaty. These vague conversations are an awkward attempt to discuss animation quality without any animation literacy to facilitate that. So, today, I would like to help get you guys educated real good on animation terminology and how it can apply to video games, particularly first-person shooter games. First, we'll start you off with the basics of animation to set the scene. The most widely taught fundamentals are called the 12 Basic Principles of Animation, from the book The Illusion of Life by Disney animators Ollie Johnston and Frank Thomas. They outline Disney's approach to 2D animation starting in the 1930s, which would later become the norm and even define how 3D animation programs work to this day. What they're really describing is the laws of physics from a purely visual stance, with a touch of psychology mixed in for effect. And like any rules, they're made to be broken once the artist has shown an awareness of them and knows what they're doing. Also, not all of these apply directly to the first-person perspective or interactive media, but I'll be mentioning those real quick just because they're super cool to think about. Now, the first rule, and one of the least relevant to most shooters, is squash and stretch. This is the way an object deforms in motion or during impact. If you look at any old-timey cartoon walk cycle, a character's feet and often their entire body squishes on each step and stretches in between. This happens a bit in video games with a cartoony style or on soft objects in motion, but not so much on guns. Now, the second rule is staging, which is basically frame composition just like in photography or cinematography. In the case of animation, you want the arrangement of the frame to bring the audience's attention to the most important action on screen. Let's take a look at the most basic frame composition, the rule of thirds, where we divide the screen into a 3x3 grid. Now, put just about any FPS interface in that. You'll notice that the player's weapon tends to take up one or two of the lower boxes. It's a significant part of the screen. You're always aware of it, but it's actually not the focus of your vision. Most guns are proportioned in such a way that they feature distinct lines that direct your eyes toward the point where they converge, the target reticle. This is the center block of the frame where your enemy goes. Most games are very careful to keep this block clear, so you can properly view who or what you're shooting and the meticulously crafted things that happen when you do pull that trigger. Moving things right along into Rule 3, we have pose-to-pose versus straight-ahead animation. When these rules were first established, pose-to-pose animation was what set Disney apart from their contemporaries. Old Walter D liked to first draw the most important poses of a scene, lay them out in the order and timing they belong in, and then go back and draw the transitional bits in between them. Nowadays, this is called keyframing, and it's how most animation software works. The animator positions the important moments, and the software takes care of everything in between. Though don't get us wrong, if left to its own devices, the software will always screw this up and create nightmare fuel, until the brave animator goes in to finagle it. The opposing school to pose-to-pose animation is straight-ahead animation, where you start with a pose and then just keep going, one frame at a time. This has the advantage of sometimes more realistic, organic motion, at the risk of some inconsistent proportions and fewer clear, impactful poses. Straight ahead was the preferred style of the quote-unquote Wild West, though ironically located on East Coast animators of the early days, and resulted in some truly impressive and mind-bending stuff, but it wasn't always cost-efficient. The closest analog to this in 3D animation might be motion capture.
You do not know everything, boy.
If these were writing styles, Disney likes to write an outline first, as opposed to writing out a stream of consciousness. In reality, the world is better off with both coexisting in harmony. For example, here's a sweet-ass reload animation from Overwatch. It makes for one fluid motion, but you can actually break it down into dynamic poses here, 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 and here. Pose to pose, Disney. On the other end, here's an equally sweet-ass reload from Killing Floor 2, which was meticulously motion captured at around 200 Hz. It still consists of distinct, delicious motions, but flowing organically as an actual person does these crazy motions just for you. At the end of these actions, we have follow-through and overlapping action. This is just inertia, the way an object continues to move after a motion until it returns to rest. The most obvious use in FPS games is the recoil of your gun. The way it kicks up in the air or back towards you shows you exactly how much force you put into that bullet. The follow-through then continues into the enemy's reaction to being shot, which is an entire playground for animators and physics programmers alike. The most obvious reaction is probably gore. Doom Eternal puts a tremendous amount of work into a procedural gore system where you can see a chunk of your enemy fly off in a cascade of hemoglobin to reveal a model of their innards, like some kind of satanic piñata. Killing Floor 2 on PC has options to show individual intestines streaking across the sky like party streamers, and a physically accurate ballet of blood particles. Games with more resilient enemies like Wolfenstein New Colossus will show you individual pieces of armor flying off your enemies, with character animations corresponding to every part of their body.
Though not a first-person game, The Division 2 lets you set off an enemy's ammo pouch, gas tank, or grenades. And just about every shooter from the past 15 years has some degree of ragdoll physics, which is always perfect and can never go wrong for unintentional comedy. Overlapping action is the way we tend to do multiple things at the same time, like walking while we chew gum, or reloading with our hands while running to cover with our footsies. While there's not as much potential for this in the first person, Max Payne 3 made some strides in overlapping action by animating Max's legs and torso separately, so you could dive in slow motion while you swivel his torso all over and shoot.
Let's take it a little easier with the rules slow in and slow out. In animation software, this is just called easing.
Worth it!
This is the way we naturally have to accelerate and decelerate at the beginning and end of a motion,
as opposed to abruptly moving at one speed and then stopping just as suddenly, to make the initial force of the gunshot seem so powerful
that it immediately sends your gun into recoil, with hardly any time to accelerate.
But then, for a believable contrast, your character's hand will naturally ease to a stop at the top of the recoil,
and then ease back down into a resting position.
The presence of easing adds impact to the sudden lack of easing, and shows you which motions are natural and which are brutal and awesome.
Next up, we're circling around to arcs.
Very few things in our world move in a perfectly straight line, due to annoyances like gravity or limbs pivoting around joints. That's why animation that moves in exaggerated arcs feels more believable and tactile to us. In shooters, this can manifest as bullet drop, lobbed projectiles like grenades and knives, and throwable weapons like also grenades and knives, I guess. It's not mandatory, but it can feel really rewarding to launch a knife up in the air, see it gather more force with the help of gravity, only to perfectly nail your supposed best friend in the eye hole. These are the little things that make life worth living.
Ironically, in 7th, we have secondary motion. This is all the smaller motions in response to a larger motion.
In video games, it tends to be character physics, cloth physics, hair physics, and all the little dangly bits that have their own inertia separate from what the character itself is doing.
But it's nice to see the ammo belts sway off an LMG, or the little charms you can put on your guns in stuff like Borderlands 3. Now, you've probably had enough of my comedic timing. Part 8 is going to be talking about animation timing. This is just the general idea of how long a motion takes and whether it looks believable.
For example, we intuitively understand how fast gravity makes most things fall.
And if this is too fast or too slow in an animation, the audience will immediately pick up on it subconsciously and realize something's off. Fun fact, reloading an actual gun takes way longer than most players expect.
Games like Destiny get around this by animating a reload based on real references, but possibly skipping some minor steps, and then they just speed that up until it's what players expect, at the cost of some physical accuracy.
Killing Floor 2, on the other hand, hired professional speed loaders, and motion captured them doing insane trick reloads that both look believable and take the amount of time the player expects. And also, they're just freaking sick. Look at them.
Oh, yeah. I cannot overstate the importance of our next rule. Exaggeration. Visually speaking, this is traditionally what happens when a movement is accentuated by stretching or growing for a moment beyond realistic expectations, like a fist getting slightly bigger during a cartoon punch and sending the recipient slightly further than we'd see in real life.
Most shooters stick to a realistic baseline for the most part, to draw us in and connect their world to ours,
And then some contrast this with shotguns that launch enemies halfway across the room, or explode them into more gore than one human body can
possibly contain outside of a Tarantino movie.
That, when combined with otherwise believable movements, can make a player feel truly powerful. However, a game aiming for true realism is entirely allowed to skip this, bending the visual truth only when necessary for enjoyable gameplay. Like that thing we said about reloading earlier. Despite its name, solid drawing is more nebulous these days. It used to relate to consistently conveying three-dimensional forms in two-dimensional drawings, but we can just create models in 3D software now and let the computer figure that out. In fact, FPS animators spend more time bending this rule by adjusting the character model behind the camera so that their hands and head end up in the right place on your screen, since you're not likely to see your entire character anyway.
If they even bother to make your character more than a couple floating arms and a camera.
Now it's time to draw this video to an enticing conclusion with appeal. This traditionally has more to do with character design, since the animator was the one drawing the characters every frame on top of creating said design. It includes making sympathetic characters symmetrical with baby-like, expressive faces that are easy to read, and unsympathetic characters asymmetrical with less clear emotions or even some amount of mask.
This, of course, varies widely by time period and culture. Nowadays, they're pretty separate jobs, but you can still tell a lot about a character by the way they move.
Overwatch is a hall of fame for first-person characterization. Take D.Va's reload animation, for example. Why does she twirl her gun like that first? Does it make her reload faster? Is that a required step when your gun is so tiny, pink, and has a foam charm dangling from the handle? No, it's probably because she's a sassy teenage streamer and doesn't take this very seriously, but also has the combat experience to casually pull off these moves. Or watch May reload. Her hand motions are delicately spaced out, careful and methodical, and one must always twist their coolant nubbin with a pinky extended. Murdering your teammates doesn't have to mean that you're an animal. Conversely, Reaper doesn't bother to reload at all. Nothing lets people know you're edgy quite like throwing away expensive equipment.
So while none of these are hard and fast rules, now you can better express what you enjoy seeing in a shooting game. There's plenty of room for preference, but if you see any of these rules being broken, ask yourself why. Does it enhance the experience? Was it deliberate? Or was it an oversight caused by lack of resources or a focus somewhere else? I mean, hey, that's fine too. Not every game has to be visually driven.
And lastly, if you want to see an example of interactive 2D animation that we can all agree is satisfying, try clicking those like or subscribe buttons below this video. Until next time, and may your every click be a headshot.